Leptin inhibits insulin secretion. So normally, if leptin levels are going up, it wants to bring insulin down. It wants to inhibit the beta cell's ability to produce and release insulin. In contrast, so while leptin is trying to turn insulin down, insulin actually has a more favorable relationship with leptin. So, leptin is trying to beat insulin down, but insulin's trying to build leptin up. So insulin stimulates leptin secretion, and then leptin inhibits insulin secretion. So from the perspective of insulin, which is how I see a lot of things, as you know, it ends up being a bit of a negative feedback. It's one way that the body turns insulin off. Now, the next part of this lesson talks about the history of its discovery and its discovery in the context of obesity. So in 1994, Jeff Freedman's lab at Rockefeller University really explored this and discovered this new hormone that was produced from fat tissue that they found played an essential role in mice. That was the animal model they were looking at, being thin. Now, importantly, these animals, what they found in this massive animal colony, all housed in their perfectly controlled cages, they got all the food and water they want. It's perfectly temperature controlled and light dark cycles, perfectly suitable for the animals. In some part of this colony of animals, some of the animals had just developed this spontaneous mutation, and they were just fantastically fat. In fact, when you get done, or pause this lecture and just look up an animal called an OB mouse or a DB mouse. They're actually just two versions of the same mouse. Whether it is a mutant, whether it's the animal that doesn't make leptin, DB is the type of animal that doesn't make leptin, or it can be an animal that has mutated to not have a leptin receptor. So it's making leptin, but it can't sense it. That's the OB mouse. And they found that by measuring all the hormones available in the blood, that these animals didn't have a hormone that the thin animals had. And that when they extracted that hormone that the thin animals had, but the fat animals didn't, and they injected it into the fat animals, guess what happened? They became lean, and in fact, extremely quickly. And so he said, Dr. Freedman said, okay, well, this is the hormone that controls being thin. And so he named it after the Greek word for thin or lean, which is leptos. He called it leptin. So now we had the hormone leptin, and this was a huge discovery. It really suggested that this was the key to fighting the obesity epidemic, which of course we know is a fight that continues to just be in full force with all these anti-obesity hormones that have become so popular. This is just the latest version of it. But leptin was one of the earlier versions because, again, they could take this protein, this hormone, and inject it into these super obese animals, and they became lean almost immediately, like within just weeks. All that fat tissue was gone. Then, of course, the next step was to move this into human trials, that they took obese humans or lean humans, both, two sets, gave them the injections of leptin. The lean people, of course, had no effect. They were already thin and they stayed thin. The obese people, no effect. They were overweight or obese before they started the clinical trial of getting leptin injected, and they were still obese or overweight when they finished or throughout the entire trial. So it was an utter failure in human trials. Why might that be? It's because the average overweight or obese individual has very high levels of leptin. Now, if a human has a leptin mutation where they aren't making leptin, which is very uncommon but has occurred, there are known and published case studies of this. And those are usually instances of just fantastic levels of obesity very early in life. So the average individual who's just getting a little chubby and then getting obese later in life, that's not what we're talking about. Those are the people who have normal leptin function, and in fact, indeed, they have too much leptin because they have too much fat cells, and there is too much insulin, as we'll get to more detail in a moment. But if someone is a true leptin mutant or has a mutation in the leptin gene, then of course leptin therapy is remarkably effective. Now, back to the trial as we transition into this final topic, this clinical trial. Why did it fail? Again, it's because the average individual who's overweight or obese, they have plenty of leptin. In fact, more than they need. And so injecting leptin doesn't do any good.